over here for career a decade ago, and I came over here for love, and I arrived with just a backpack and a manuscript of one of my novels, Cleave, and a printer. For some reason I thought I can't buy a printer in England, I have to bring it over with me, and that was it. And met my ex-boyfriend here, and 10 years later we have accumulated a whole household around us, plus 3 children. I'm a writer over here. I began as a writer in Australia, but after my second novel I decided I wanted an English agent, a London editor. I wanted a doorway to the world, I guess, and I thought it was much easier to do it over here in London than to try and do it from Australia. I'd had a series of disastrous relationships in my 20s, and then an ex-boyfriend rang me up when I was 30 and said, God, your life's a mess. Come over here and start afresh. And so I did. And cannily, he invited me in July, and I'd only ever been to London in like mid-December when it's freezing, and I'd stayed in grotty hotels, you know, with damp towels and that kind of airless smell about them, and I hated London. But when I arrived in July, the pansies were out in the pubs, people were smiling when they talked. There was this sense of optimism and joy that I'd never seen before in England, and I loved it. There are wonderful things about this country. I'll walk down Soho, you know, on a summer sunny evening, and I'll just think, my God, this is the centre of the world. You look around you and all these people and the dynamic energy of London, and you kind of walk along cobblestones that feel like they're soaked in blood. You're playing in history in this place. One of my favourite buildings in London is the London Library, where I go and write. And it's run along the lines of this deeply eccentric gentleman's club from the 1920s, but they ran out of money, so in the 70s they gained charitable status, and now they allow anyone in, riffraff like me, a coal miner's daughter from Wollongong. But it's got the most incredible history. You know, T.S. Eliot was president once, and Virginia Woolf went in there and looked up the F word in the dictionary, and it's still got her thumbprint in the dictionary. Tom Stoppard, he's the chairman of it at the moment, and it's like, I just go in there and I think, what am I doing here? And that, to me, is the magic of London and why I am here. Yes, it gets me down. You know, I just want people to smile when they talk, to be optimistic, to, you know, even the dull teeth on them and that kind of thing. There are so many things that drive me bananas about this place. But then I'll go to the London Library, or I'll just walk down the street, and I'll go to the American bar at the Savoy, or I'll go to Claridge's, or whatever it is, or I'll just look at St Paul's Cathedral and then the Roman wall near the Barbican, and I'll think, wow, there's nowhere like this, it's amazing. Our incessant desire for travel has something to do with we are so far away from everywhere else, and we want to see the world. And I love that sense of adventure and that kind of spirited pluckiness that young Aussies have. I don't know if I'd do what I'm doing now in my 40s. I think it's something particularly that young people do. We're doing it as we've always done it, to kind of broaden our horizons, see the world. But I think the Aussie expat situation is changing, whereas, you know, in the 50s and the 60s you get the Greers and the Hugheses and the Jameses and et al. Thinking they wanted to turn their back on Australia in horror and come here forever. I think young Aussies now, they come to places like Britain to experience it, but to think, eventually I'm going to bring that experience back home. I'm not going to stay in London forever now, or wherever it is. I want to come home eventually, and I think that's because Australia has become a lot more attractive for us. We don't have that cultural cringe necessarily that, you know, was part of the fabric of the Menzies world in the 50s and all that kind of thing. Are Australians over here different from Australians in Australia? They're less judgmental. And I love that about them over here. I find them, like when I go back to Australia and back to my little world where I grew up, I feel like there's still that feeling of, oh, you know, are we not good enough for her? You know, why is she over there? What's she doing? But over here, it's like-minded Aussies, and it's so exciting what so many of them are doing. And I find that there's a sense of dynamism to the Aussies over here, a can-do attitude, a kind of, you know, just taking on the world for what it's worth, and a really exciting energy to the people over here. London is such an excruciatingly expensive city to live in. It's so hard that it's like you've got to sink or swim, and so I guess the Aussies that are over here in a way are the ones that are really going to swim. I remember when I first came over here, I lived in a bedsit on Fleet Street and I was unemployed for the first 6 months, which was a real shock to the system. It was a really hard thing to get a job over here, and I ended up working night shifts at the World Service, and my husband, he was doing night shifts at the Labor Party at that time, and it was like, it was hard yakka and we were getting paid a pittance, but it felt so exciting. And I think that's you know, what you get with a lot of the Aussies over here. It's like, you know, you're willing to work hard, play hard, seize the city, seize the world. The media's obsession with neighbours and sunshine and sport and the fantastic lifestyle and all that kind of thing, culture's never mentioned there. And I think there is still this makes my flesh crawl, this kind of snobby attitude that the only culture you're going to get in Australia is in a yogurt pot. Yogurt, not yogurt. You know, I don't mind this sense of envy that I feel around me for the Australian lifestyle. I think it's finally, we are being recognised and taken note of. I just see it in the school playground on a simple level as that, you know, mums at the school gate, at the London school that my kids go to, they say, oh, it must be such a better life in Australia, and, you know, we want to move to Australia and we just want the sunshine and all that kind of thing. And I wonder if that was the case with school gates in the 1970s or the 1980s. There's a sense that Australia is booming and that people should be taking advantage of that. It's really starting to get to me after 10 years. I'm feeling Britain's negativity chip away at me, and kind of, it's clawing away my own sense of optimism. I can feel it in me to not smile when I talk, to not quite look people in the eye, to be curt and abrupt and kind of not friendly. And, you know, I notice it when I go home to Australia now. It's like, my goodness, the guy at the customs desk, or, you know, as I walk through customs, it's like he smiles when he talks and he's friendly, and the cabbie, we're having a huge conversation. And I worry particularly for my children. I'm raising 3 children here, and I want them to have that sense of optimism. I want them to smile when they talk. I want them to be friendly and look people in the eye when they talk to them. I want them to have that positive can-do attitude of, I can be anything, I can do anything if I work hard enough. And I'm not sure they're going to get that in that country. And it's a huge question mark over our future in this country. I don't think for me dual citizenship means that I'm having 2 homes. I will always be Australian, my home will always be in Australia, but I certainly want to take up dual citizenship, not so much for me, but for my children. I want them to be able to have the opportunity to do what I've done in my 20s or my 30s, which is travel back to Europe and work in Europe and all those kind of things, see the world. And I just think with a British passport, they'll be able to do that perhaps much easier. I get the feeling that things are tightening in terms of Aussies coming over here and working, and I want them to have the same opportunities that I've had. So for me, dual citizenship, a British passport is a piece of paper. I'll always proudly wave my Australian passport, and I'll never give that up. I certainly don't feel any guilt that I'm robbing Australia of my intellect. I do feel guilt, though, that I'm away from my family, that I'm depriving my parents of their grandchildren and also my grandparents of their great-grandchildren. I feel like this is the old golden age of grandparents, because my mother's generation, my grandmother's generation, they all had children relatively early, at 20, and yet we're all living longer. So for a lot of us, we can have young kids, but we can also have great-grandparents in their 90s. I've got 2 wonderful grandmothers in Australia, and I feel this sense of guilt that I'm not with my family, that I need to be home to bring all that family together. I absolutely don't worry that I won't find a sense of fulfillment when I go back to Australia, and I will go back to Australia. I'm going back for my children as much as anything. I know that I can give them a better lifestyle over there. I can give them, my God, perhaps a front yard and a nature strip and a hills hoist in the backyard and all those kind of things. Or as my little 7-year-old says, Mummy, in Australia, they swim outdoors in swimming pools. It's like, you know, and I want them to be able to walk through long grass barefoot and all that kind of thing. I want them I want them to be able to do the Aussie crawl and so many reasons why I want to go home. And I know that I'll be fulfilled by that decision. But I also feel like in terms of the literary world, Australia, the writing scene, it feels so much closer to everywhere else now too. You get these wonderful visiting publisher schemes now with the Adelaide Writers Festival, the Sydney Writers Festival, that they bring over European, British, American publishers. You get scouts looking at Australian fiction. You know, the internet makes it so much easier to read what's happening everywhere else. I don't feel that sense of isolation in terms of the writing world that I did 10, 15 years ago. And I think the question is, where do you want to be buried? And for me, I've said to my husband, I don't want to be buried on English soil. I don't want that cold, damp seeping into my bones. Take me home, bury me under the Aussie sun. But I think it is an interesting question. It's about where you feel home is. I used to live in Alice Springs and had quite a bit to do with Aboriginal people, and you know, they used to talk about falling sick when you're away from your land, and I feel in a way for me I have this malaise being away from Australia, away from the light, away from the tall blue skies, away from the smell of eucalyptus trees. You know, I've grown a gum tree in every back garden, and I don't say backyard, back garden that I've had in London, just so that I can, you know, pluck the gum leaves and crush them and smell home. Oh God, I miss it so much.